everybody. I'm Elle. Hello. Nice to see you. I am trying something new today in honor of 100 newsletters. This today I'm releasing a newsletter number 100, which I release twice a month, which means that this has been going on for 4 years. But you've probably never seen me, except maybe in, here and there on Instagram. So, or if you come to a live event, which you should. Um, Obviously, I'm very excited about this. I'm just very excited to be an author at all. Um, and so I thought today we'd try something new. For me, it's been done before. Uh, but I have here my paper copy of the Carousel Capers. This is free for newsletter subscribers. The ebook is, at least, and then you can get the deluxe print edition. It has some wonderful extra things. Way at the back there's some notes about the different carousel horses that are encountered and so on. It also has at least one bonus story. But anyway, I digress. My newsletter started out 4 years ago, around this time, because I was sharing the Carousel Capers. And I don't think I had even started planning how to publish Beauty and the Alchemist, which is book 1 in my Alchemical Tales series. Excuse me. But I had these short stories that serve as the prequel, right, for Beauty. So I just started sharing them with people. I think I had 20 people on my newsletter at that point. And I started out just by putting the documents up on my website and being like, hey, everyone, go read about this alchemist and the strange horses that show up at her door. We've come a long way since then. But in the spirit of celebration, I have the book. Obviously, I will read the first story. And I wanted to also share this little guest appearance. I'll pick him up. There he is. So that is the carousel horse that kicked it off. You may have heard me tell the story before on different blogs or in the print edition. But we found these carousel horses. My, at that time, boyfriend, now husband, and they were in this little case. There was 12 of them. They were all different. So I'll hold this guy up again because I think he is really beautiful. You can see they are tiny, and they were all really distinct. So I just found them really inspiring. I always liked horses, but there was 12. I was like, who? I can't just buy 12 carousel horses. It was meant to be just kind of a, looking around sort of trip. I wasn't ready for that level of commitment. So I did my best to narrow it down to my 4 favorite and then my 2 favorite. Came home just with 2 that day, only to find that the rest of them began showing up for birthdays, holidays, Valentine's Day, until my husband finally ran out of patience and just gave me, I think, the last 4 or 5 all at once. Obviously, this was years ago, and they have been on my bookshelf and became the inspiration for the Carousel Capers. So, this little blue guy, one more time, there he is. He is the star in the very first Carousel Capers story, which is called A Blue Shade. And I have not thought through any of this except for the fact that I will read to you. So we're going to awkwardly configure here for a minute. I am going to open up my book. Okay. We're going to think a little bit. Hey, that's kind of cute. You can see the book. All right, and I actually have light. And I feel like I'm hiding, but I guess you can see me still. Who cares, right? All right, here we go. A Blue Shade, the first Carousel Caper. In the world of beyond, every country is once upon a time and far, far away. Moving from one to the next is like leaping through a wormhole to another planet. From fairy tale castles to pirate-infested waters, then on to alien landscapes or Magitech cities. With magic and a little bit of luck on your side, you can go anywhere. Except, of course, for the afterlife. Or at least, that particular trip doesn't come with a return ticket. Anyway, I'm the perfect person to talk to about travel, because I've been almost everywhere. Born the child of mystic seers, I'm an alchemist by trade, and only recently stopped roaming beyond to set up a potions shop in small-town Belleville. Ironically, though, the focus of this story is the epitome of staying in one place. This is a story about a cursed carousel horse. Not exactly a formidable beginning, right? And not only a carousel horse, but a tiny one at that. A child's toy. Normally I'm happy to find humor in anything. My mother would always say, it's hard not to look on the bright side when you live in the desert. Something I remember with much more fondness now that I've started a new life far from home. But the truth is, this business with the carousel horse started on a more serious note. A letter, in fact. Scrawled in the worst handwriting since the very first person picked up a quill, written on an old piece of parchment crumpled around a small blue horse, it read, Red, old friend stopping by Belleville, have a knoll to look at, will follow afternoon, old time's sake counting on you. It ended just like that, abruptly. And though the note and the horse showed up on my doorstep in the mail, my old friend, whoever they might be, never came. Red, look at me, Red! I shook my head, letting the world filter back into place. I sat on what might have been a stack of books in Owl's overstuffed bookshop, one hand buried in my cloak clutching that strange little horse. The shop sounded empty, quiet, and smelled like leather book covers. The clerk knelt in front of me with a tome clutched to his chest like a talisman, and from under his scholar's hood he regarded me with patience. Sorry. I sucked in a breath, reminding myself that I'd gone to the bookstore for information. 3 days I'd been carrying that horse around in my pocket, wondering where my sense of foreboding was coming from. I'd even begun to imagine people watching me from behind lampposts on Belleville's cobbled streets. It was past time to learn about my new toy. I was spacing out, I told him. Thanks. Sorry, I never asked your name. It's fine. I only gave you the discount of the year on a potions book the last time you came in, said the clerk, his green eyes alight. I mean, really, though, don't feel bad. Most people in town just know me as Owl's assistant. He sat back on his heels and stuck out a dark-skinned hand. I'm Luca. Red, I said, returning the gesture automatically. Copper, that's how I've always thought of my skin. With obsidian hair and a protective shell of lab gear, and really, is it any wonder I became an alchemist? Luca shook my hand, and that small gesture banished the last of my wayward thoughts. I smiled back at him. Of course, you already know that, just like everyone else in town. And miles around, most likely, he said. That's the price of being a mysterious stranger who practices alchemy. Are you sure you're okay? I'm fine. But the horse and the baffling note had thrown me off my game, making me hesitate. I sighed at my obvious lie and added, Or, anyway, I will be. So did you find anything on carousel horses? Or charms, maybe? Well, I couldn't find any definition or reference for knoll, and nothing on carousel horses either, Lucas said, his voice full of apology. I mean, unless you want a kid's story, which I don't think is what you were looking for. So, in that case, the closest I could come with this was this encyclopedia of water charms and focuses. You said the horse you're researching is blue, right? Yeah, I said, shifting uncomfortably on my stool. But why would a carousel horse have anything to do with water? I don't know, but then you never do know, right? Luca handed me the book he'd been holding and flopped onto the dusty floor as I perused it. Even if it doesn't help exactly, it might give you some ideas for where to look next, he said. I bit my cheek, half listening as he continued. I could look up some old scrolls on statues. I'm pretty sure we have some in the art section. Most of them are just a catalog of historic artifacts, but maybe if the object you have is historically significant, then it's just a trinket, I corrected automatically, before glancing from the pages to Luca. Unless there's some famous series of old horse-themed artifacts out there that I've never heard of. Well, no, not that I know of either, but I figure it never hurts to try. As Luca spoke, my fingers tightened around the horse. I had described it to Luca, but I hadn't actually shown it to anyone yet. Maybe I'm being paranoid, I thought. Maybe I should take it over to the antique shop and see if they know what it is. Meanwhile, Luca was still talking. Now, you did mention charms, and if there's magic in it, maybe it is an artifact. Not a historic one, but a magical one. You know, like the kind Owl would call a storied ritualistic object? No, I don't. Scholar speak has never been my strong suit. No one really does, said Luca cheerfully. Close as I can tell, it means that the object is attached to a myth of some kind, and that myth gives it power to weave a very particular charm. A charm most likely associated with the myth. Am I just rambling, do you think? By the time Luca had run out of topics to ramble about, my lunch hour was over. I hastily thanked him and half walked, half ran back to my own shop on Belleville's Market Square. My store, Red's Alchemy and Potions, really was a dream come true. It sat at one corner of the tree-dotted square, with glittering bay windows and a tidy front step. On the first floor were potions, ingredients, and all kinds of inventions for sale. On the second floor was my tiny apartment, which I shared with a magic familiar named William. Despite his appearance as a big, hairy black dog, he was an arcane being full of his own ideas. And during my trip to the bookstore, he'd been in charge of my shop on his own long enough to cause trouble. So I hurried home through the summer heat. Fortunately, the shop was still standing, and the rest of the afternoon went smoothly. But my attempt at researching the little horse had left me with more questions than before. That night, over a fragrant dinner of curry and rice, I told William everything Luca had said. And, against my own better judgment, I finally let my magically inclined companion see the strange gift I'd found in the mail. William, who often sat on a chair at the tiny dining table with me, despite the fact that he rarely ate my dinners and was far too huge and furry for my apartment-sized furniture, looked down at the horse and growled. And you didn't show me this to me in the beginning because... I stared at my plate. The horse, made of deep blue stone and gilded gold mane, tail, and accents, complete with carousel pole, pranced in my peripheral vision. It was only as tall as my palm. But the words of the note echoed in my mind, heavy with allusions to old times. I had thought I'd left my past behind me when I settled in Belleville. It's not that I had anything to be ashamed of, exactly, but I was trying to start a new chapter in my life, trying to focus on my business, not on some wild carousel horse chase. Because I wasn't sure what it was, I said finally, sighing. And I don't want to get you in trouble. I think, Well, I had a bad feeling about it at first, and now that no one has shown up, I think whoever sent it is in danger. William sneezed. Or they are the danger. Scorn aside, though, he lowered his head to look properly at the horse. What's it made of? He asked. The question surprised me. I had figured that in his arcane vision, it had become clear that the thing was made of ancient magic and racing nightmares or something like that. I hadn't even examined it closely myself. But since he asked, I pushed aside my half-eaten meal and pulled my alchemist goggles, always plastered on my forehead, no matter where I am, over my eyes. At first glance, I'd say polished azurite, I told him. The stone isn't very hard. You can see scratching if you look closely. But I think the gold is real. And the bookstore guy couldn't find any reference to it? He suggested looking into historic artifacts, or, oddly enough, water charms. Suddenly thinking of the scratches on the horse's neck like a person clawing for air, I set it down and started cleaning up my dinner. William watched me as I wiped down the kitchen island, stowed my leftovers in a small, enchanted icebox, and piled dishes in the sink. Did you show it to him? No. What do you think? I've been running around flashing it to everyone? There's a joke in there. William's tail thumped, but just as quickly he turned solemn again. At least you have some discretion, even if you didn't catch on to the fact that it's suspicious how he knew to suggest water charms and storied objects. He was just throwing out ideas. So? As I said the words, I looked out into the darkness. The kitchen occupied the upper corner of my building, so I had a window in front of me at one sink, and another behind William in the dining nook. When moving in, I had liked how light the place could be, but now the windows made me shiver. I thought you were friends with Owl, and now you suspect his assistant of what, exactly? I asked. I'm just saying, it's weird how much they know sometimes, William said. You never know, maybe there's a crime ring out there after this horse and they've recruited Owl and his assistant. My hands slipped on the soapy dishes. You sound like Officer Thorne, I said. Yeah, well, anyone who talks as much as she does has to be right some of the time. William shook himself and glowed momentarily, a starry blue light I knew well. It meant he was strengthening the protections he kept up around our home. Red, he said. If it's a myth, then I know which one it is. This time I dropped the plate altogether. You know what? Starting to think maybe you should have come to me at the start, nah? He asked smugly. When I turned to him, putting wet hands on my hips, he let out a canine whine. Come on, how could I not know about a mythical creature? I am one, you know. You're a familiar who somehow lost his sorcerer and now spends most of his time sleeping, I retorted good-humoredly, as I moved back to the table and spun a chair around, sitting astride it. Spill. What do you know? I never get any respect, William murmured. First of all, look at it again. Those aren't hooves, they're too long and flat. They're little fins. And the tail is too long and thin to be a horse. I shrugged. I figured it was artistic license. You weren't looking because you didn't want to, he said. It's a caballo marino. You don't recognize the name? What do they even teach you in alchemy school? How about a bunyip? A wihwin? A nixie? A bacahast? A kelpie? First of all, I didn't go to school for alchemy. I apprenticed. Second, you know you're the expert on occult matters around here. And third, you're just pulling my leg, I said. I am not. That's what these things do. William gestured to the little horse with his nose and sniffed at my other comments. They trick people into touching them, and once you've touched it, then you're locked on and it drags you down into the water. Sometimes it eats you, too. Other people say it's a way for sorcerers to get to ghost ships. Okay. I looked at the statue again. It did have a marine look. Are you saying that this is one? Or just that it's a what-do-you-call-it attached to the myth? Of course it isn't one, not literally. Don't be ridiculous. But it is something, William said, abruptly pushing it over the table toward me. It's got something inside it, some charm I can't see. So if we break it open, you'll know what it is? Why are you so literal, Red? If you break this statue, you'll just let whatever the spell is out before we have time to prepare a defense. Okay, so no breaking the weird carousel seahorse, I said as I stood and stretched. If that's all the wisdom you have to share tonight, I'm going to bed. Tomorrow morning I'll go see Thorne and get her take on the horse, the note, everything. So if you want to come along, get your rest now while you can. The next morning technically marked the beginning of the rest day, but I didn't spare much time for relaxation. Officer Thorne, Belleville's one and only police officer, lived and worked at the station on the edge of town. It was only a 10-minute walk from my shop to the squat wooden building. In the early morning sunlight, Belleville's police station looked like a deflated guard tower still striving to keep the forest at bay. Officer Thorne herself was anything but deflated. With gorgeous black hair, broad face, and green skin courtesy of her half-orc heritage, she was always picture-perfect in her uniform. This morning was no exception. William and I found her at the station's front desk with a basket of chocolate croissants, a toothy grin, and a terrible pun about breaking fast. "You've been scarce lately, Red," she continued, as she gestured for us to help ourselves to the pastries. To my surprise, William did. "Dusty told me you got something strange in the mail a few days ago," Thorne added. Trust Dusty, a local handy gnome and gossip extraordinaire, to go about spreading news I had thought was secret. If I hadn't been so worried, I might have laughed aloud. "So," said the officer, "what have you been hiding?" "Nothing," I said, simultaneously putting the carousel horse and the note on her desk. At her raised eyebrow, I blushed. Well, nothing I did, anyway. These showed up a few days ago. While William steadily munched through the supply of chocolate croissants, I filled Officer Thorne in on everything we knew about the carousel horse, which wasn't a lot. But it was enough for the officer to turn grave. "You might have thought you were kidding about a ring of bandits," she said, with a firm glance at William. "But I've had reports of unusual activity of late. Ambushes on mail carriers and the like." She moved the basket of pastries to the other side of her desk. "Where?" I asked, hoping for a clue as to which old friend had sent the horse along. Officer Thorne just shrugged. "On the roads." "Yes, but—" "Now you listen to me, Red." This time her chastising tones fell on me, and I stopped protesting. She went on, "You just keep doing exactly what you'd normally do. Keep your head down, but stay alert. People are bound to figure out that you have the horse now, that you've gone all over asking folks about it." "Are you suggesting," I asked, crossing my arms, "that we use a magical object as bait in luring out some roadside bandits, making me the victim of the next attack?" "Of course not. You aren't a victim," Officer Thorne said, and rounded her desk, giving me a friendly pat on the back. The gesture felt more like a mossy thunderclap. "You're my unofficial assistant," she said, "and I need you back on the force, not lurking in your shop brooding over some toy." "You just contradicted yourself." "Don't bother, Red," William piped up. He was still eyeing the chocolate croissants. "And anyway, I haven't been hiding in my shop," I added, gaining steam. "I had a feeling something like this was bound to happen, and I wanted to find out why." "That's the spirit," said Officer Thorne. "Put that on the back shelf for now, would you? We don't need any magic interfering here. This is just some good old-fashioned trap setting." Too late, William mumbled. He was probably talking about the magic. Either way, I paused for a moment to shush him. Although I couldn't help pointing out that Officer Thorne hadn't actually set any traps. Not as far as you know, Officer Thorne retorted with a grin. Besides, if you ask me, that entire shop of yours is a trap just waiting to happen. I pity the criminal who tries to cross on you and your dog. William hates being referred to simply as a dog. I don't know if it was that or the worse than usual pun, but I pretty much had to drag him out of the station. Leave her be, I entreated him through gritted teeth as we lurched onto the street. She's not exactly wrong, and you know it. Don't get me started on you, William growled back. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? I'm just trying to be careful. It's not like we know for sure that anyone else even wants this horse, I said. How careful is it to talk about it out on the open road, especially when sorcerers are coming in from all across beyond for the big meeting, William said. He had a point. Until that moment, I'd totally forgotten about the meeting, which was a month-long conference mixed with magical fare from the sound of it. Sorcerers really were coming from all over for it, as were other magical creatures. I'd never seen it myself, but it was a local tradition. You have no idea who could be listening, William added. Do you think the meeting has anything to do with the... Don't even say it, William said, his nose in the air as he trotted along beside me. You know, you could get the answers yourself instead of running around everyone else. I knew from experience where this conversation was headed. Fortunately, we were halfway back to the shop. The back alley was just coming into view on the left, and once we were there, I could take refuge in my lab. Just because I come from Sears doesn't mean that I have any magical aptitude, as you well know. I am a scientist, I told him. I'm just saying, if you would do the seer thing more often, then I wouldn't have to worry about you blabbing to the wrong sorcerer or running right into bandits, he said. I don't do the seer thing. Do we really need to have that conversation again, Mother? I looked away from William, exasperated, and skidded to an instant halt as my eyes caught sight of a shadow. Exasperation turned quickly to incredulity. Beside me, William vibrated like a twanged bowstring. Someone's trying to get into the shop. I know that, I hissed at him, as though the intruder might hear us all the way down the road. I just saw him come around the corner. William and I blinked at one another. I made my decision. What are you doing? William called as I ran ahead, ducking so that I wasn't visible from the back patio. He broke into a lope to keep up. What's it look like? I called back. You go get Thorne. Well, you do what? Offer yourself up to the thief on a silver platter? I'm just going to watch him and see where he goes. When William didn't stop following me to the shop, I added, the faster you get Thorne, the less time I have to do anything dumb. I said it to distract him, of course. I didn't plan to do anything stupid. Whoever does? But William bought it and streaked off in the direction we'd come. Meanwhile, I crept silently into the tiny yard behind my shop. The thought of roadside attacks had been disturbing, of course, as had the nameless dread which had followed me since the carousel horse showed up. But this fool had stepped on my turf. I knew exactly where to walk so he couldn't hear me, and where to stand so he couldn't see. I took up a post along the fence underneath an overhanging plum tree behind a ramshackle shed. I could see the man as he glanced furtively around my yard, but when he looked my way, all he saw was dappled shadow. I tried to gauge who he might be. Pointed ears suggested elven blood, and yet height-wise he looked shorter than my 5'8". He wore leather armor and carried not one, not two, but a veritable dining room set of daggers. Ugh, no, don't, I mumbled, watching him run his hands along the frame and test the latch. The glass was unbreakable. William's ward ensured that. What I worried about was my menagerie of potted plants, far more valuable than anyone realized, which at any moment the thief might grab and try to toss through the window. The result would be a broken pot, and I had made all those specially. Not to mention, I'd only just fed all the plants some fertilizing powder that took days to properly prepare. The last thing I wanted was for all that time spent grounding down ingredients and letting them cure go to waste. Quickly, I calculated my options. William had probably made it to Thorn already, but they'd take another few minutes to arrive. Too long for the safety of my plants. I stepped out from my shaded hiding spot, my eyes fixed on the thief. He had his back turned to me. I bent and grabbed a rock from the scrubby grass and hauled my arm back. After a moment to aim, the missile sailed straight and true into the back of the cretin's head. "Oi!" The man jumped up, straight like the patio had bid him. He whirled. "You!" "Nice to meet you, too," I said, stepping back into the shadow. "Missy, you stole a very valuable trinket. The Grand Sorcerer wants it back. I could pay you gold." I stopped listening and dropped into a crouch, picking up several more rocks. Now yelling in frustration. Good, I thought, that'll bring the officer here even quicker. The would-be burglar charged right over to my biggest pot and launched himself, daggers first, in my direction. I dodged from my corner, easily evading the bandit. As I went, I threw a rock that caught his left hand and made him drop his dagger. Though I wasn't a practicing seer, my heritage blessed me with swift feet and a very sure eye. "Hey, idiot," I said, "want to tell me what happened to my friend?" The man's gaze swiveled to me, and I'm sorry to say, he smiled. It was revolting. "You mean he didn't tell you about them?" "Sure he did," I lied. "But aren't there two sides to every story? Unless you aren't bright enough to remember what side you're on." "You got quite the mouth for nothing but a shop girl," the man growled back. "Best hand over the Mariner's Ride before I get impatient." And then I finally caught on. Mariner's Ride, the Grand Sorcerer. I drew breath to make a retort, something very witty, I'm sure, just as soon as I thought of it, but was spared the trouble when a bolt of black flew into the yard, and Officer Thorne's panting face appeared in the alley, rapping smartly, "Police!" Everything went still. In the middle of the yard, two muddy boots stuck out from beneath a glowing dog. The bandit recovered first. "I want this woman charged with theft and assault." Oof. William sat more firmly on the man and looked back at Officer Thorne. "I told you I wasn't pulling your leg." And so, Thorne's got him in her dungeon as we speak, I finished. Well, it's not a real dungeon, though he does deserve one, in my opinion. But the Belleville jail is very like a dungeon, especially if you're there with Officer Thorne and William at the same time. We can't be sure which Grand Sorcerer he meant, since there's a million of them in town for the meeting, and they all think they're the greatest thing since Magitech, but we're not giving up. I paused, smiling, but still a little uncertain. Silas, an adventurer I'd met ages ago in the Dragonlands on some grand and exciting quest, nodded encouragingly. Tall and scraggly and covered in haphazard plate armor, he looked exactly as he had all those years ago, aside from being a bit see-through. Yes, Silas was dead. Just about to cross into the afterlife, in fact. I'd met all kinds of people all across beyond, but I'd never yet talked to a ghost. The only reason I could talk to one now was something that the bandit had said. The Mariner's Ride. That was what Silas had mentioned in his letter, not some made-up knoll. His R had blended into his I, and the D came apart into an O and an L. In talking it over, William and I had agreed that this was the magic inside the horse. The spell he hadn't been able to see because it didn't represent a thing exactly. It wasn't a what or even a how, but a how to get there. Acting on a hunch, and under William's careful supervision, I'd clutched the tiny horse, asked to find its most recent owner, and been pulled, like a buggy behind a very excitable pony, to a sycamore perched on the hillside overlooking town. And now I sat against its trunk, talking to someone beyond the grave. Someone, I realized now, who had been trailing along behind me ever since the carousel horse showed up. That feeling of foreboding heightened, then vanished when I looked at Silas's familiar face. The breeze ruffled through the leaves above. I still clutched the carousel horse in my hand. As long as I held it, the world shimmered blue and silver, as though the earth was a weightless gauze, and life itself had put on twilight glasses. But I had a feeling that as soon as I let go of the horse, the spell would be broken. I'd see the light of sunset and feel heavy again, and smell the hearths from town. And I wouldn't see Silas any more. This was my chance. There's no need to worry, you know. Everything's safe, I promised. William had devised a special arcane box in which to keep the precious carousel horse hidden, but I didn't want to say that aloud on the hilltop, just in case. Silas nodded again, as though this was exactly what he had planned. It seemed that, even though I could see him in this strange place where our world and the next overlapped, he couldn't speak. In the blue light, William's words about ghost ships came back to me. I'm sorry, I said on impulse. Where I come from, everyone likes to say that things happen for a reason. But I've always been on the fence about fate myself. Silas shook his head this time and beamed at me, the smile of an adventurer off on a new journey. He waved his arms expansively down the hill, as if saying, "Go, enjoy." I laughed. I stretched out my legs in front of me, attempted to touch my toes, though I'd never been able to, but every once in a while I like to check, and stood. All right, I'm going. This has been wild, but I'm glad I got to see you again. Are you going too? No more lingering around? Silas nodded one more time, and he waved. Around him, the air seemed wispier than ever. Okay then, I whispered, smiling. Good luck. I didn't say goodbye. Not exactly. In Beyond, life can take you to unexpected places. And although I've never been too sure about the future being fated, Silas's trust showed me that my past really had stayed with me just below the surface. And that carousel horse was only the beginning. All right, friends. It is literally indeed only the beginning. We go on for, 10 more stories. And then, of course, there's the whole Alchemical Tales series. Those are novels, though, featuring Red and her friends. Thank you for coming along on this ride with me. This was a lot of fun. You could probably tell I haven't actually read that in a little while. And you would think some people, before reading aloud to a camera, might practice. And I did not. But honest, I love rereading those stories. On one hand, as an author, sometimes it's embarrassing to go back and read old stories because it's like you've come such a long way. But sometimes it's like, oh man, that was cute. I had forgotten that Red literally starts throwing rocks at a thief, but it was adorable. So once more, Thank you for being here. Thank you, especially if you have been here all the way since newsletter number 1. That is amazing. And let me know if you would like, I can read more of these stories. I could read chapters of the books. I know sometimes it's a little tough when you're reading aloud to tell like when people are talking and that sort of thing, but I did my best. So if it's something you'd like to see more of, let me know because I had a lot of fun. So on that note, I hope you have a lovely day and I will talk to you next time.